Since Hitler now believed that the world would stay silent when it came to the issue of Jewish persecution, on January 30th, 1939, he took his rhetoric a step further, talking now not just about persecution of Jews, but starting to talk about the idea of mass murder. In a speech before the German Reichstag that was published throughout the world, Adolf Hitler stated, "Europe cannot find peace until the Jewish question has been solved. One thing I should like to say on this day, which may be memorable for others, as well as for us Germans. In the course of my life, I have very often been a prophet, and have usually been ridiculed for it. Today I will once more be a prophet. If the international Jewish financiers in and outside Europe should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, then the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth, and thus the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe." While many world leaders chose to ignore these new threats from Adolf Hitler, both President Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin immediately reacted to Hitler's speech. President Roosevelt called an emergency joint session of Congress, stating to Congress, "In meeting the troubles of the world, we must meet them as the united front of one people. If another form can present a united front in its attack on democracy, the attack must be met by a united democracy." Joseph Stalin argued at the time. He said, "The Soviet Union will not be drawn into conflict by warmongers who are accustomed to having others pull the chestnuts out of the fire for them. If the Western powers proceed with this dangerous political game, it may end in a serious fiasco for them." Roosevelt is now putting out far more publicly that he's willing to unite with the other democracies of the world, including the Soviet Union, and that war can still be averted. Stalin is saying to Western powers that he's still willing to talk and peace still can be saved, but if they continue to play around and not take things serious with Hitler, they might not like the outcome. Throughout the year 1939, the crisis in Europe continued to deepen. On February 27th, 1939, as we've mentioned several times already, the British government is going to recognize Francisco Franco as the legitimate ruler of Spain. And despite the fact that the Spanish Republic was still resisting Franco, according to Adolf Hitler, the Spanish Civil War had now been won. And any German troops that were bogged down there in Spain are immediately pulled out, shipped over to the Eastern Front, and on March 16th, 1939, German troops invade Czechoslovakia, taking over the entire nation, and when they arrive in the capital city of Prague, they loot the treasury there at Prague, send the money back to Berlin, and continue this process of paying off their corporate debts. A few days later, for the fact that the world had not stopped him in taking Czechoslovakia, Hitler is going to demand that Poland now hand over its territory to Germany. Ironically, on March 31st, 1939, despite the fact that Britain and France had not assisted democratic Spain or democratic Czechoslovakia, these two nations are now going to sign a military alliance with Poland, saying that if Poland is threatened by Germany, that Britain and France will come to Poland's aid. The great irony being is that Poland is an anti-Semitic fascist dictatorship that is being threatened by another anti-Semitic fascist dictatorship. And these two democracies that had done nothing to assist other democracies are now offering to step in to assist in the protection of a dictatorship. The problem with Britain and France signing an alliance with Poland is that neither nation borders on Poland. So on April 16th, 1939, Joseph Stalin requested that the Soviet Union be added into this pact. He said at the time that he was willing to mobilize the entirety of the Russian Red Army to have them march in to Poland, stationing themselves on the borders of Germany, if France in turn mobilized her armies and stationed them on France's border with Germany. arguing that by pinning Hitler on all sides, that World War II could be prevented. The only reason why the British and the French would not talk with Stalin on this issue was that the American ambassador, Joseph Kennedy, met with Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and told Chamberlain that no matter what happened, to not include the Soviet Union into this alliance. He argued that Hitler's goal was to defeat communism, to conquer the Soviet Union, and since his armies were now heading to the east, that the British and the French should do nothing to try and stand in Hitler's way. For the fact that nobody stood up, on May 7, 1939, Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini signed a formal alliance called the Pact of Steel, now creating the Axis nations of World War II. On August 11, 1939, after pleading for such a meeting for over 5 years, the Soviet government is visited by British and French diplomats. Those diplomats are sent to the Soviet Union to discuss treaties with Joseph Stalin, but they're given absolutely no authority to sign on to any treaties. Stalin, for the fact that he had the largest air force in the world at this time, on August 11, 1939, he pulled out the entirety of the Russian Air Force for an air show over the capital city of Moscow to show the British and the French that he had the military might to take on Adolf Hitler and that peace could still be saved if the British and French would simply sign on to a treaty. On August 17, 1939, British and French diplomats leave the Soviet Union without having signed a treaty, and Stalin, rightfully so, was enraged. What British and French diplomats didn't realize was that Stalin knew that they were trying to push Hitler's armies east, and that they could not be trusted. So on August 23, 1939, Joseph Stalin pulled the ace out of his sleeve they had been hiding for about 5 months and announced the signing of what was called the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. This was not an alliance between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. It was a 10-year peace pact, stating for the next 10 years, neither one of these two nations would attack each other. What they also argued was these two nations would split Eastern Europe in half through military occupation, creating a buffer zone between these two superpowers that someday would probably go to war with each other. Joseph Stalin argued at the time that if World War II happened, there would be a war of Nazi Germany against the Soviet Union, and that the Soviet Union would have to defeat Nazi Germany all by herself, and they needed more time to prepare for such a conflict. For the fact that Hitler no longer had to worry about a war on two fronts. We'll see on September 1st, 1939, German forces invade Poland, utilizing Blitzkrieg War, which translates to a lightning war, nicknamed after the GM Opel Blitz truck, which was the fastest troop carrier in the entire world. The problem for the Poles is the Poles start resisting German occupation, but most of the Poles who go out to fight the Germans are coming out on horseback, and they're fighting against Panzer tanks, which means they are no match. And Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain of Great Britain recommends to the Polish government to simply surrender and to open up negotiations with Hitler. When the Poles refused to surrender, finally, Great Britain and France declared war upon Nazi Germany. 2 weeks later, Soviet forces marched into the eastern parts of Poland, and over the next several weeks started taking over the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and parts of Finland as well, creating a military buffer zone between the Soviet Union and between Nazi Germany. The awkward part of this is that while World War II was now officially proclaimed, neither Britain or France sent a single soldier to assist Poland or to fight against the Germans. Many people at this time referring to the opening part of World War II as the period of the quote-unquote phony war. And on day number 1 of World War II, we also see day number 1 of the Holocaust, which was both predictable and preventable. Following German troops into the east is a death squad that's nicknamed the Einsatzgruppen. And every time official German forces move through a new territory in Poland, the Einsatzgruppen comes in after them and rounds up in villages all men, women, and children of a Jewish background. They then take these civilians, march them out into the woods, and have them dig pits. And one by one they shoot these people in the head and dump their bodies in pits, simply for being Jewish. The problem in major cities is that while one can get away with mass murder from day number 1 in small communities, you can't get away with it in major cities. So what the Einsatzgruppen does in major cities such as Warsaw is they target the Jewish communities exclusively, beating up Jews in the streets, participating in public acts of humiliation, trying to portray to non-Jewish Poles that if non-Jewish Poles did not resist German occupation and looked the other way when Nazis attacked Jews, that non-Jewish Poles would be safe. The scariest part of the Einsatzgruppen is that many people who had participated in this after the war, they put out the argument that Hitler had made them do these things and that they had no choice. The problem with this argument is a historian by the name of Christopher Browning spent his entire career studying the Einsatzgruppen, and he wrote a book entitled Ordinary Men, where he pointed out with the reality of the Einsatzgruppen that those who were participating in this had a choice about participating every single day. That their commanders realized that the mass murder of human beings on a one-on-one scale was incredibly difficult psychologically. And if any soldier did not want to go to participate, there is not one single documented record of a soldier being punished for saying that they did not want to participate in murder. Which means no, Hitler did not make these people do it. They had a choice, and they chose to kill. In major cities, after humiliating Jewish peoples, we're going to start seeing is German Poles and Jewish Poles being rounded up and sent to concentration camps and to ghettos, where they're forced off to a segregated part of the city, cut off from the outside world, and being used as slave laborers for major corporations. Joseph Stalin, in the eastern zones of occupation, argued that the reason why Soviet forces were there were to protect Polish Jews from Nazi atrocities, which is not the reason why they were there, but it's going to be true, as those Jews who are in the Soviet zones of occupation are going to be rounded up and moved off to safety into the Soviet Union so that Nazi soldiers cannot target them.